Hi, this is David Davis from ActualTech Media. We're live here at VMworld, and I'm excited to be joined by Mr. PJ Kirner. He's the CTO and co-founder of Illumio. How you doing, PJ?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So, we've talked before,
Yes.
Last VMworld, and we came by your offices earlier this year and learned about Illumio. And I'm every time we talk, I learn more and I get more excited about what you guys are doing. And the talk here at VMworld, a lot of it is around network virtualization, software-defined networking, microsegmentation. And so I think as IT professionals learn more, they get more excited and they are interested in how this might be able to really help them, in their company. So, first, let's just start off with, who is Illumio? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so Illumio has built an adaptive microsegmentation platform, right, that really helps people stop cyber threats by controlling and constraining unauthorized or unwanted communication inside your data center in your cloud.
Okay, so traditionally the data center has kind of been the hard outer shell with the soft gooey center,
Yep.
and you all are changing all that with Illumio.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the the values of what microsegmentation is. The metaphor I like to use a lot is the idea of the submarine, right? Like if you had a submarine and I'm sure they built these in the first time, is if there was a breach, right, the entire submarine would go down. So what did they do, right? They made smaller and smaller compartments, like segments, right? Mm-hmm. And they made them watertight so that when there is a breach, right, that the water can sort of be contained and you have a minimum impact to that, right? So that's kind of the philosophy that made sense for that, and it makes sense for your data centers. You sort of pointed out that it's not good to have the soft and chewy inside because malware gets in there. And then just once it gets in, and we know it all comes in from lots of different places, it then just looks around for all the goodies. And if you're not paying attention, if you don't have anything to sort of stop it, right, then it can just find stuff and then exfiltrate, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and we hear on the news one security breach, after another. It's really sad, and so hopefully most enterprises are kind of waking up and trying to figure out what they can do to better protect themselves. And microsegmentation is really kind of the answer. And I like that analogy with the submarine, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very apt on. And I do think it's. I mean, you're right also about. I like to talk to CISOs and I kind of want to ask them about what are their top 5 priorities, right? And segmentation, compartmentalization, have always been like, have increasingly becoming one of those core security controls that you really need to have in your data center to be secure. Right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I feel like we're kind of going through a technology cultural change right now with, traditional infrastructure versus hybrid cloud and cloud computing and containers and all these things. So I'm kind of curious to ask you, what's your take on all that?
Well, in some ways, that's what I mean. The genesis of Illumio for me was, I sort of saw how firewalls and other security products were working and how they were built for like in the good old days when you could look in the catalog for your servers. You picked whichever one, your compact catalog. You picked whatever servers you want. You ordered it. They showed up on the loading dock on the pallet. They got racked and stacked. And you're talking about like 6 months for things to sort of change. And I mean, we're here at VMworld, and like virtualization was one of those things that was when VMware came out and for virtualizing the data center accelerated the pace of change, right? And then you have Amazon and Azure, and I have a credit card and I can go get a server in like minutes from knowing that I wanted one. And I think containers are even like pushing it further in terms of having a workload, right? An instance of something that might only exist for 20 seconds to do the one and only one thing it was intended to do. So that change, right, to this dynamic distributed data center, I think is what you're sort of talking about. Mm-hmm. And as I sort of said, Illumio came out because of what does security really need to look like if that's the way the world is working. So how does it need to be different? So I love being able to sort of participate in that change, right? And helping the security industry sort of change to sort of match what's happening in terms of other infrastructure and cloud and all those things.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, you all are really leading the charge in securing the future of the data center. So, let's talk about how Illumio works. Can you kind of walk me through the process? So let's say I'm a virtualization admin since I'm at VMworld here. Maybe I have a security admin as well. We work together. I'm interested in microsegmentation. Kind of what's the process?
Yeah, the one thing. So there is a agent that sort of gets installed into the guest OS. And one thing I would like to sort of point out is one of the other premises around Illumio was the idea of being hybrid, right? People were going to have these hybrid environments, right? There's still lots of bare metal out there, right? Non-virtualized, right?
That's true.
There is virtualized environment and a VMware environment. There is an OpenStack contingent, right? And there's the different public clouds that are there. And having something that sort of works across all of those is kind of critically important, right? But to go back to your question about sort of how it works and how would a VMware admin sort of start? Yeah, I mean, yes, it's about it's the first part is collecting data, right? So there is an agent there. It sort of collects a whole bunch of telemetry about what's happening on the system, about network and traffic flows, and then the first thing, right, that sort of happens is it produces what we call is an application dependency map, right? Okay. It is a data visualization, right, of traffic and other contexts that really kind of shows how your applications work together, right? And you can look at it at different levels. You can look at it from a data center view, and you can look at it from an application view, depending on what kind of goal you're trying to sort of get to. But the important thing is you sort of have that map of things to get started, because you can't do a microsegmentation project, right, unless you sort of have a map and sort of know where things are, right? Because that's the first kind of thing to have to be successful. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's the term you guys use in the booth is you get illuminated by this map. You really get to see visually what's going on the network, who's talking to who, what ports, what protocols, what applications. And I know a lot of companies, they try to create that maybe in Visio, and then the next day it's of course out of date because you just can't keep up with that kind of stuff. But here you are dynamically keeping that map up to date, if you will. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely and back to that, I mean, part of why you need a dynamic map, right, and is because back to the changes in the infrastructure. But I mean, you could think about it like back to Google Maps, right? Like having real-time traffic data overlaid on top of that, right? If you want to know when to leave work to sort of get home and avoid traffic, you need to have it be real time, right? So that's really important to making these decisions, making the security decisions, making the segmentation decisions, and making sure the apps still sort of work, right?
Yeah, and I would think, I mean, it's very important not just for security, but even for kind of these hybrid cloud scenarios we talked about. Who's talking to who? What applications are dependent on other applications? I mean, I even went through that, like with disaster recovery. Like what applications require communications and services with other applications, and people just don't have that information.
Yeah, that is a great point. Yeah, so understanding how this all works, right? I mean, for disaster recovery purposes. Maybe you're doing cloud migration. Maybe you're trying to virtualize. Maybe you're trying to virtualize stuff, but understanding your risk also, right? Being able to look at a business process, or like what is the risk to the system? Do I have a single point of failure, right? I mean, these are security questions, but they're also operational questions, right? Like, how can I make my system resilient, right? And having that graph helps with those. Having that graph and the data and all the visualizations come with that help those what might not be classically seen as security use cases. It makes it useful for those people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the problems we've talked about is the security group or anyone interested in security is kind of always last to the decision-making process. It's like new applications get implemented, and then the security guy says, hey, what about security? And people say, oh, we never thought about that. So how is Illumio helping solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's kind of the security guy gets in the bad rap of the guy who always has to say no to stuff, right? I mean, in some ways, it is their job to sort of understand risk and help the business choose the right level of risk. But what they really want, and from my conversations, is what they really want to be part of the conversation. right? They want to be sort of seen as, contributing to it. Like how can they contribute earlier in the cycle, in the development process, and be part of the conversation. And so again, part of the data visualizations allow the like app developers, right, and the people kind of implementing maybe some of these security controls, like have a common language, right?
Okay.
So for example, like we hear stories about like, the app developer wants I want my web tier to be able to talk to the database, right? It goes over to like the security guy who might be implementing something in a firewall, and he says, well, what port's that on? Right? The app developer says, what's a port, right? I mean, they're not sort of talking about the same. They're not talking about the same thing, right? Because one is the low-level implementation, and one is the the language of the application developer, the application owner, right? So sort of having people be able to, both the security folks and the developers or the app owners, sort of work at that same level, have that common language is important. Another thing that we announced, right, at a week ago is this thing we call Policy Generator,
Okay.
right? And it goes to that same kind of spirit of kind of democratizing the microsegmentation policy, but you could sort of say, well, the security folks know, like they're the experts in security, but how can you involve the application developers? And you can't have all the application developers fully trained, in security. Like the concept of DevSecOps is not that nobody is an expert anymore. They're still expert. Like the developers are still the expert at doing the development. The operations folks are still the expert at operating things, and the security guys are still the experts at security. But how can they all sort of work together? So Policy Generator is a thing that sort of helps the developer community sort of pick a strategy on microsegmentation.
Yeah.
Right, and then all the rules can kind of get written for it in a much easier, much simpler way. So they have to understand less. The security guy's still in the loop, right? They still have to be able to approve and finalize and maybe double check everything. But getting the conversation going is, was one of the goals of that.
So does the developer have some sort of visibility here, or with Policy Generator?
Oh yeah, they have. And that's a good point. Like so one of the views that we have is what we call app-centric view.
Okay.
Right. So it is the view of your application. Because there's other views. There's like a more physical view, a logical view of like what things are in what data centers. But if you're an app developer and the operations team has decided for resiliency's sake to deploy your application in 5 different data centers, or maybe also in public cloud, you might not even part of that conversation, right? So having so those views are good, but then having a view of, here's my application, right? Here's the nodes in the application, here's how they sort of work, is kind of the start. So yes, they get the view, and then they get tools to sort of help. The Policy Generator is kind of a tool that sort of sits in line with that view to sort of help them very easily construct. We'll go back to the Google Maps view, right? Like if you're trying to get directions, right? You put in the source and you put in the destination. Google Maps figures out like what the right thing is, and maybe you need to choose a few things, like avoid the toll roads or avoid the highways today, or something like that. You're kind of choosing some strategies, some high-level strategies, and then it sort of figures out what roads to take, and takes into account the traffic and all of those things, and sort of comes up with the answer. Again, the microsegmentation policy. Yeah. Once you've included those things, but you have not really. You're sort of giving the information, the goal, the intent of what you're trying to accomplish, and then its job is to sort of figure out all the nitty-gritty details. You don't want to be in there like figuring out what IP address this is on and what port it's using, and all that stuff can sort of like melt away from the app developer, who probably wouldn't even know it at all. So
yeah. So once you're illuminated, you know who's talking to who.
Yep.
They use the Policy Generator to create these policies very easily for your applications. And then does Illumio essentially lock things down and compartmentalize the network and create this microsegmentation?
Yeah, and so that's a great question. Like once you've written that policy, right, and there are features in the product that allow you to sort of test, right, because you can't just turn on this, right? Like have you, like, you know, there are batch processes and things that only happen so infrequently, and you need this. You give the system enough time to
like a
learn
modeling, you
and
can
understand.
see. Yeah.
So you can basically model this, right? And you could say, well, if I had the segmentation policy, you don't have it yet. You say, if I have it, how would it operate? What would it do? What would it block, without actually blocking those things, right? And have this whole, it basically, you know, it models the whole thing. With the real data, right? That's sort of happening before you sort of move into the final stage, which is what you sort of indicated, which is the enforcement view, where you now are actually implementing the allow and deny rules inside, you know, the system that actually does, actually implements the microsegmentation policy. And then at that point, you have the compartments, right? And part of the, you know, part of what's important is, I'll go back to an auto, you know, if you have an auto scale event, let's just, you know, or you're just adding more servers to, you know, more virtual machines to, you know, a group, right? You don't change the policy, right? The policy is still the same. So for a very simple thing is maybe you want your web tier to talk to your processing tier and your processing tier to talk to your database tier. Nowhere in there did you say how many nodes are in the processing tier, right? And nowhere in there did you sort of say, well, it's just the ones that are there right now, right? It could be 1, it could be 100, it could go up and down. And part of what the policy compute engine does, and where we spend a huge amount of time and investment in engineering resources, is sort of figure out how to make this thing dynamic, right? How to make it adaptive, right?
Yeah.
So whenever that does change, the policy compute engine gets that new information, figures out, because it's a giant graph engine, you know, underneath there, right? Figures out what has changed, what the relationships are, and then what needs to now be implemented, right, to sort of still keep those kind of, that declarative policy that you sort of, you know, wrote at the beginning still true, right? And it does this all the time, you know, 24/7, 365, to sort of keep that policy the same. So you don't have to worry about all those nitty-gritty details or get them wrong. I mean, the other value is, you know, we talked a little bit about that, like being correct, right? Like so how do you know you got them correct, right? And sort of didn't introduce you know, a mistake in, you know, clicking the wrong thing, and now you have a mistake in your segmentation policy. So under all that change, right, making sure everything is correct.
Wow. I mean, coming from a background in Cisco administration, just my mind thinking about how would you do, you know, microsegmentation with a traditional, you know, network tools. It's extremely painful, and I love thinking about how easy it would be, you know, with Illumio, this adaptability, the modeling, policy generator, all this to really just kind of make it easy to perform this microsegmentation and really secure the enterprise data center like it should be. So thanks so much for sharing the Illumio story today, PJ.
Thank you.
For more information, I assume people can just go to illumio.com.
Everything's on the website, and happy to, you know, engage you there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks so much. For more information, of course, visit illumio.com to learn more and get started.